She's with the Texas Homeschool Coalition. She's all the way from Austin. And yeah, we're glad that she was able to make it with the weather being what it is today. Her name is Stephanie Lambert. Let's give her a round of applause.
Thank you, sir. Hello, everybody. You have water coming down from the sky here. So I have nieces that live north of Austin. So I spend a little time in Austin. I spend time in Austin with things going on in the legislative session, as a bunch of you do. I have never, I'm ashamed to admit this, I've never before this week been to Big Bend. It's our own national park. I've never been there. It's so far away. So I just drove yesterday to San Antonio and then the rest of the way here from Big Bend. And there's very little water in Big Bend, but it's so beautiful. Who's been to Big Bend? Okay, guys, we all have to go there. It's just so beautiful and it's hours. It feels like you're in another place because it's mountainous. But anyway, they don't have water coming down from the sky there. And where I live in Lubbock, where I spend most of my time, we don't have much water coming down from the sky either, so I like it here. I wanted to tell you that my parents took me to meetings like this from the time I was a small child. We would work in campaigns. As little kids, we were compiling information. I remember rubber banding it so that people could deliver it door to door. We were going door to door. We were block walking. That was just part of our home education. Our parents just included us in what they did. So this is a very familiar setting for me, and I appreciate each and every one of you. You guys are fighting the good fight and making a big difference. So I wanted to find out, I work for the Texas Homeschool Coalition. I also was voluntold in the Texas Homeschool Coalition until I came on staff and started getting paid. So this is kind of how I've grown up. And then we launched the Family Freedom Project, so I'll explain a little bit more of that to you. But I wanted to find out who in the room either homeschools your kids or are homeschooled.
Well,
okay.
We did it. We finished.
Or you did homeschool your kids. You can raise your hand on that too. Okay, great. And then who in the room has any kind of extended family that homeschools? Okay, great. Okay, some of that. All right, so I want to let you know, say again.
How many wish they did?
Oh, how many wish they did? Yeah. At the end of this talk. No, okay, that's part of your job. That's part of the next activist thing we're all going to do together is go encourage all of our friends to, take the reins of their own kids' education. But, all right, so I'm going to explain to you a little bit about what the Texas Homeschool Coalition does and what we're working on in the legislature. So we not only work for homeschool families, but we work for all families for parental rights in the state of Texas. Oh, does something really cool. All right, so we're going to be talking about the parental choice landscape in Texas in 2023. So I'm going to cover who we are, who is the Family Freedom Project, who is the Texas Homeschool Coalition. We're going to talk about our legislative priorities, and then we're going to talk about parental choice legislation and what's on the horizon as far as that goes. So the Texas Homeschool Coalition was started in 1986 as a political action committee. And my dad was on the advisory committee for that organization, and it was started because homeschooling was not clearly defined as illegal. So a bunch of groups of people like this were getting together to talk about how we were going to deal with this, because there were parents actually being arrested for homeschooling their kids in the 80s and 90s. So the Texas Homeschool Coalition was a PAC. My dad was asked to become the executive director of it in 1990, and he launched the 501c3 and the 501c4. So he started the nonprofit organizations. I was a wee child back in those days, so what the organization looked like in 1990 was a fax machine. Some people in the room are going to need an explanation of what that is. And an answering machine, and a phone. And on the answering machine, the message said to leave us a message and we'll call you back collect with the information that you need. So my mom would school us during the day, and then she would go and sit in our den where we kept the office of those things I've already mentioned. and then she would return calls collect, and she would give people the information they were looking for on homeschooling. So that is the early days of the Texas Homeschool Coalition. It took 10 years, so homeschooling was not actually officially recognized as legal in Texas until 1994. 1994, so recently. The Lambert decision was made by the Supreme Court of Texas, and it's that recent that we have won the freedom to make decisions for how we educate our own children. All right, so that's a few things I mentioned to you right there. One thing I did want to say is in 2011, the Texas Homeschool Coalition board met, and they basically talked about the fact that homeschool freedom was established. The law in all 50 states had been established, homeschooling was legal. But if parents didn't have the right to make decisions for their own kids, then that took away the foundation of the freedom to even homeschool. And so the board of the Texas Homeschool Coalition amended our mission statement to include defending parental rights. So since 2011, the Texas Homeschool Coalition, really the homeschool population, has been fighting for all families across the state of Texas to have the freedom to make decisions for their own kids through the Texas Homeschool Coalition. So because of that, we just last year launched something called the Family Freedom Project. So this is actually what I want you guys to know about, and I want you to get involved in, and I want you to follow and sign up to get emails, familyfreedomproject.org. So the Family Freedom Project is basically just a new name for what we have already been doing. So we exist to advocate for and defend the liberty of families to make decisions for their own kids. We have so much history. We have the history and relationships because we've been doing this through the Texas Homeschool Coalition for years. So in Austin, in the legislature, we're recognized as the authority on parental rights in the state of Texas. The Supreme Court of Texas also sees the Family Freedom Project in the same light. So our vision for both of the organizations is that the next generation of leaders be raised up and that a foundation of freedom is established to the glory of God. We see really what is needed for children to succeed is parental involvement. Whether you have them in public school, private school, homeschool, parental involvement is the key. So we are fighting for the right of parents to make decisions for their children. And then we believe that we need to establish a foundation of freedom right now while we have the freedom that we have. I often stop and think how grateful I am that my parents and the pioneers of the homeschool movement decided to do that back in the 80s. It almost is amazing to me because I think they had schools that had prayer in school, they had Bible reading in school, and they were still motivated, I think, by the Spirit of God to be like, we can do it better. And I say by the Spirit of God because what they did is they blazed a trail back in the day for parental choice in education back in the 80s and 90s that would be a lot more difficult to do today. So this is our vision. We want to establish a foundation of freedom right now while we have the freedom that we have. And I think that actually the leaders that are being raised up by parents who, like you guys, who are investing in their own kids, they're going to be the leaders of the next generation, and they're going to help us establish that foundation of freedom. So this is the Family Freedom Project mission statement. We exist to advocate for and defend the liberty of families to raise their children as they see fit. And this can ring true for you as you think what curriculum is in the public school and who should have the right to decide on that. What kind of medical vaccinations or treatments or whatever kind of things that children have, who should be the one to make that decision? And we believe that God gave kids to parents to raise and to educate and to care for, not the government. So that's what we're here to fight for. So I'm going to talk to you about our legislative priorities as an organization. We have 2 constitutional amendments. I'll actually walk through all of these things. We're working on CPS reform. You can hear in these things how a lot of this applies to just families across the board. Parental presumption, so I'll explain that. Juvenile curfews, and homeschool college admission. So I'm going to talk through these legislative priorities, and then I'm going to talk about our perspective on parental choice legislation, what we're doing for parental choice legislation, and our positions on it. All right, so we've got 2 constitutional amendments that we're working on as an organization, both Family Freedom Project and the Texas Homeschool Coalition. So one is a parental rights amendment. So it places protections directly into the Texas Constitution, declaring that parents have the constitutional right to make decisions for their own children. It seems obvious, right? But this is a day and age in which we're having to fight over a lot of things that seem obvious, right? So this is something we want to have in the Constitution, these protections for parental rights. And then the other constitutional amendment that we're working on is the homeschool amendment. So in Texas, homeschool and educational, like homeschooling private schools, this is a great state in which to have your kids in either homeschool or private school or anything like that. But we want to establish that in the Constitution so that no matter what may come into our state, that's something that's very difficult to be turned around. That's part of like establishing that foundation of freedom. So the homeschool amendment will place directly into the Texas Constitution just protections for educational freedom for families, for private schools and homeschooling. Our CPS reform bill. So this is something that's really exciting. Again, we have Capitol Days that we host in Austin. This year we're doing lobbying field trips instead, but we have homeschool kids come with their parents. They learn about how the legislative process works, and then they actually go lobby these bills. So bills that were lobbied on by little homeschool children include the CPS reform bill. So last year in the 2021 legislative session, we actually were able to pass a CPS omnibus bill. And as that bill passed, and we've been working on this, Jeremy Newman, who's our VP of Policy and Engagement, he's been in work groups working with all the different players. So we've been working on this for years, but little by little we've been able to help the legislators understand the situation and what's going on and the need for reform of the CPS system. So with the bill that we passed last legislative session, unnecessary removals of children from their families have decreased by 40%. That's just from the 2021 legislative session. So we're really thankful. Representative James Frank is a close friend of ours and an advocate, so he has spearheaded that. We love working with him. We're gonna build on that success in this legislative session. So the bill that we're promoting this year is gonna add substantial due process reforms to the CPS system to ensure that innocent families aren't swept up in the system. So the homeschool community, almost more than others, we end up getting unfairly targeted by the CPS system, partly because a lot of their systems are centered around the public school. So when your kid isn't in the public school and they can't do their normal processes, there are requirements and there are laws, but a lot of times those things are just missed and overlooked, and due process kind of goes out the window, and then families are unfairly treated. Another thing is people see homeschooling as a red flag, like maybe you just want to keep your kids away from us, you know. So that's one reason. That's what got us into CPS reform type issues. But again, we're for freedom. We believe that the best place for children is in loving homes with their parents. That's how God designed it, right? He designed families. And children need to be with their parents. So what we had to help the legislature understand is that if you remove a child from its family, you guarantee trauma. And so the due process needs to be followed, because if that trauma is not necessary, that child should not be removed. So that's what we're working hard on. So one of the due process reforms elements that we're working on is that ex parte hearings not take place. So what will happen is a judge and CPS will meet without the parent or without their attorney present. And so again, this doesn't happen it's prohibited in virtually any other type of litigation. So we want to see those type of things included in CPS reform. All right, parental presumption bill. This again includes, this is for all parents that we're working on. So this bill is going to require, and I'm not even showing you all of this. Parental presumption, okay. Can you guys see the words from the back there? Squint really hard. Okay, I'll read it to you, don't worry. Okay, So this bill is going to require that courts give preferential weight to the opinions of parents as opposed to non-parents in court cases regarding their own children. So for example, we had a case that actually the Supreme Court made a decision on January 27th, was with Trey Kalanick. So he is a father whose children were taken from him because of the mother in the situation. They were temporarily placed with the in-laws. He was recognized by the court, by CPS, by everyone involved to be a fit parent. So the kids came back to him. But after he got the kids back, the mother-in-law decided she wanted the kids. And so her whole reasoning was that because the kids had been temporarily removed from the father, and because they had been temporarily with her, she then had the right to have partial custody. So the problem with this is, if a non-parent can sue for no reason a parent, then anybody can be suing anybody for their kids, right? So this is precedent setting. So we got involved with this case. We actually teamed up with former Supreme Court Justice Eva Guzman to represent that father. And the Supreme Court made the decision January 27th that the father was a fit parent and that the children couldn't be taken from him on that basis. We had two possible wins. One was that the father gets to keep his children. One is that the father gets to keep his children, and the Supreme Court made a really strong statement that kind of established that foundation of freedom for all parents across the state. So we didn't get this strong opinion just because of the way things worked out legally. It was clear for the father they didn't even have to go that far to make sure he kept his kids. So now the Family Freedom Project is watching for other cases where we can get involved and help the Supreme Court make a really clear statement so that it'll be understood that the parental decision should be much more heavily weighted than a non-parent. What's happening is the judge is saying, this ex-boyfriend wants custody and you want custody, and then the judge is putting himself as the tiebreaker. But we believe that the parent that their opinion should be considered what's in the best interest of the child, because God gave kids to parents, right? Okay, we're working also on abolishing juvenile curfews locally. So in the past 10 years, we have probably gone locally to 15 different cities where this is taking place. So again, I don't know if I mentioned this, but as a child, when I was being homeschooled, my mom had like a plan for us. So we didn't go outside during school hours, and if the truant officer came to the door, we went and got in the closet, or we went up. We never had to, but we had a plan. So we were gonna go hide in the closet till they left. This doesn't sound like America, right? This is not freedom. So we believe that parents should be the ones that can say where their kids can be during the day, not the cities. So we've had little by little the number of cities doing this has declined. Jeremy Newman, my coworker, same issue. He grew up in the DFW area, and a bunch of those different areas had curfews. So his mom kept them inside because they actually had curfews. The kids would possibly get arrested. So we're actually going to the state legislature, and we want to say that city governments are not allowed to create curfews. We're going to try to address that from the top. All right, and then college admission for homeschoolers. This is something we've gone to the legislature. This is the third time. But the admission process, as it changes, homeschool students end up being discriminated against at times. So it might be, because you're homeschooled and we don't have a process for that, you have to score higher than somebody else who goes to private school or public school. So we have to go in and help them come up with a fair way to handle it. This will be the third time we're doing it. We're having to do that just because the processes are changing. So since COVID, and maybe even leading up to that, colleges aren't necessarily utilizing SAT and ACT tests the way they were. So we're having to fix some issues regarding discrimination of homeschoolers. All right, so parental choice legislation. What is it, and what is our position on it? So parental choice legislation, or also known as parental empowerment legislation, we believe that it's that kind of legislation is intended to increase the ability of parents to make decisions for their own children, especially as it relates to education. So that's how we would define parental choice legislation. So the Texas Homeschool Coalition, you'll hear me say Family Freedom Project, Texas Homeschool Coalition. If it's educational, it'll fall under our THSC brand, and if it's parental rights, it'll fall under FFP. So our position on parental choice legislation is that we support legislation that increases educational opportunities for parents and for families, as long as it doesn't negatively impact homeschooling. As long as it doesn't negatively impact parents, grandparents' freedom to choose to homeschool, we support legislation that increases educational opportunities, because God gave kids to parents, and we think kids thrive when parents are the ones that make the decision for them, not the government.
Amen.
So we have two priority parental choice legislation bills that we're promoting, and then I'm going to talk to you about some other bills that have been filed. So one of them is HJR 37 by Cody Vasut, and it's the constitutional amendment that I already mentioned to you. It's filed by Cody Vasut in the House and by Phil King in the Senate. And then the other one is the parental rights. So both the parental rights and the homeschool constitutional amendments. These are the two bills that we're focused on from a parental choice perspective, just to protect freedom for parents and for an educational freedom, homeschooling as well.
Could you back up?
Back up, let me try. That one?
You got a problem.
Yes, sir.
You got SJR 72 on both slides.
On both of them.
Two different
Oh.
authors.
Let me see what I did here. Okay, yeah, I have the wrong one on the second slide. So if you want to ask me about that later, I can get you that. But Hughes in the Senate and for the parental rights bill. Thank you for that. All right, so what other parental choice legislation is being considered right now? So you'll hear a lot. Who is hearing a lot of buzz about parental choice legislation? Okay. You are a little bit, okay. So across the country, a lot of people have been exposed to what's happening in the school system through COVID. So THSC passed our legislation we've been working on for probably over 20 years, which would allow homeschool participation in extracurriculars at the public school. Again, this is gonna pave the way for all parents to be able to utilize whatever their tax dollars are paying for. That's how we believe it's an issue of freedom, right? All right, so one thing that people are considering is education savings accounts. So these, basically, you all probably know this, some of you in this room probably know this extensively, but the way that the education system is set up in Texas is the money for a child goes to a district. So in a way, it's like a third-party payer system, right? Kind of like your insurance goes to the doctor, not through you, right? The money goes straight to the district. So what education savings accounts would do would say that the money, instead of going straight to the district, it would follow the child. So it would actually be in the parent's control, and the parent would be able to choose, make educational decisions with the money that their tax dollars are paying for. Does that make sense? So they could be like savings accounts, they would go into a certain account, the parent is the one who, administrates it, and they would utilize it for educational goods and services. So what is our involvement in this discussion as an organization? So we want to be sure that freedom is protected in this whole discussion. So it's not like we're going to give you this and you're going to lose all your freedom kind of a discussion. So we want to ensure that strong language for protecting families from state interference in the education of their children is included in this legislation. We believe it's really important, just like you guys are each involved. I was talking to different ones of you, helping with the kids in the neighborhood, or involved in the precinct or the party, or, in all of these different ways that you guys are involved. We want to be involved at the legislative level, making sure that the wording in these bills, which become law, protects freedom. And then the next thing is that we want to be sure, as the Texas Homeschool Coalition, that the wording actually practically works for homeschoolers, like that they could use it for things they would actually use it on, like dual credit or books or curriculum or things like that. So there are many different types of bills for parental choice and education savings accounts that have been filed. So I would say they fall under these three categories. One is universal bills. So bills that say all students across the state would be eligible for a parental choice, for parents to be able to choose where the money goes. But the funding is limited because we only have so much money. Okay, the next type would be that new student bills. So current homeschool or private school students who are already outside the system, so that means the money is not going from the state to the district for that kid, they wouldn't be eligible with these bills. But new people would. So if a kid gets out of the public school system, there's already the money in the school system for them, they go do something else, that money would follow that kid. And then the third type of bill that's been filed is special needs or low income. So this would say, instead of doing everybody all at once, children who are special needs, who need to find something that, a different school that meets their needs better, or children who are low income, that, these bills would help those children. So a few FAQs about education savings accounts. How does it work? I kind of already mentioned it's a money follows the child kind of route instead of a money going directly to the district. One question is, has it worked in other places? So across the country, there are 72 programs in 32 other states that have some type of money follows the child program and system. As far as, is that eroding freedom? That's one question that we all care about. I know everybody in this room cares about freedom and about liberty. That's why you're here, you're fighting for it. We haven't seen regulation for homeschooling in an increase in any of those instances, in any of those states, and this is for decades. So it appears that people are utilizing it and it's working. Homeschoolers may have the question, does this change the definition of homeschooling? The short answer is no. We utilize the same definition that's already in the law, and it is also in case law from that court case in 1994 when homeschooling was clarified as legal. Are there protections for homeschools and private schools in the bills? Since everybody in here isn't necessarily a homeschooler, these aren't probably the first questions on your mind, but yes. So as an organization, one of the things we've done is, so in Texas, homeschools are considered a type of private school. So when we're advocating for homeschools and private schools, homeschools are a type of private school. So we're putting protections into the bill to protect that freedom so that we won't see regulation increase. The cool thing is, I was talking to some of you, most homeschoolers across the state do support the bill. So the reason I say that's cool is because homeschool families tend to be more active. They tend to be kind of like activists. So the bill that we passed last legislative session, called our Tim Tebow bill, that allows homeschool participation in extracurriculars at the public school, it's opt-in. And so school districts have to choose to opt in. So there are 1,200 school districts in the state, and only a tiny percentage of those have so far chosen to opt in. It's going to take time. But I was mentioning to these guys earlier, the rainbow in the rain is that it's going to be made on a district by district. That decision as to whether the school will allow homeschool participation or not will be made at the district level. So suddenly, there's a very tangible reason for these active homeschool families to get involved in their school board elections. So as you meet homeschoolers, as you run into them, talk to them about these things. There are many other great reasons, right? It's our tax dollars that are paying for the school system. It's, those children will be the peers of homeschool children. So the great news is that the vast majority of homeschoolers do support these bills. So education savings accounts, basically a question that's been asked is like, what are the requirements to participate? So it comes down to two basic elements. It's eligibility and administrative. So it's basically going to be kind of what I mentioned earlier. Is it available to everyone? Is it available to people who are already in the system, or a limited, like, special needs? And then the other aspect that they'll be considering in whether in participation is just administrative. So they will want to make sure that the money for educational things is not being spent on donuts. For some of us, maybe those are educational donuts. So how do we, as a group, as activists, how do we protect our freedom? So I am proud to be Texan. I'm proud to live here. I'm proud to be an American. And we protect our freedom the way that the people who have gone before us protect our freedom, and that is with a great offense. That is not living in fear. It is being active and having a great offense. So our organization has vetting committees that we've set up around the state, and we actually invite, and if you have candidates that you would like to see endorsed by our organization, the Texas Homeschool Coalition or the Family Freedom Project, we have vetting committees around the state, and we invite candidates to come and we actually vet them. We sit down and talk with them, and while we're vetting them, we're educating them on our issues. And then we put out endorsements. So we send endorsements to the homeschool community, and remember, these are active people. One time we had the lieutenant governor at one of our events, and he said, do you realize that if the estimated number of voters in every homeschooled household, it's estimated because in Texas you don't have to go register somewhere, so there's an estimated number. He said that would be, if all of those people were registered, that would be 20% of the Republican primary voting bloc. He recognized, he did the math in his head, like that's a big voting bloc, right? So what we do is we educate candidates and we endorse candidates, and then we are active in the legislature. We go and we work on killing bad bills, and we work on passing good bills, and then if people don't hold to their promise, what they've told us they'll do, we go find somebody else and we support them. So I just want to encourage all of us. I'm excited to see so many people in this room. I want to encourage all of us to be active. The best defense is a good offense. So let's be offensive. Let's fight for the freedom that was hard fought for us. We have a lot of reason to hope. We have a great country. We have been given so much. So let's fight for it. So we believe that raising children is a family's God-given right and calling. And we believe in empowering parents, all parents, to raise and educate the next generation of leaders. So I want to thank you for what you're doing to help make that happen. I want to thank you for helping us, because we all do this together to keep Texas families free. If you want to get involved, we do. If you have grandkids or kids you want to introduce to homeschooling, we have a conference in the Woodlands, June 1 through 3. So the Woodlands Waterway Marriott, so come. We welcome you to that. If you want to be a part of the Family Freedom Project, where we're focused on parental rights, we're active in the courts, we're active in the legislature, we're active in elections. Feel free to go to familyfreedomproject.org and donate. We would, and also get on our email list, like stay informed. We'd love to have that connection with you. Thank you, guys.
There may be some questions.
Questions? Mine should be relatively easy. So I noticed that, maybe I missed it, it didn't look like Bill is actually some specific bills with the school choice that you guys are getting behind. I happen to like that SB 176 with Middleton. Is that one that you guys support, or which one you all kind of get behind, or can you?
Well, we generally support them. I would say in general, we support all bills that increase educational freedom for parents. So I would say we're for it. But yeah, as long as it doesn't, and Middleton is a good friend of homeschoolers. So yes, we definitely support that bill. But there are so many right now, and we're going to wait to see. We're not waiting. We're promoting our specific ones. We're supportive of them. And then we will see, as a group, all of us will see which ones rise to the top.
By the way, it's SB 70, not 72.
7-0.
70.
Thank you, Tom.
And do you know if those constitutional amendments had enabling legislation?
Enabling legislation, I can't, I need to put you in touch with Jeremy for some of the specific things on that, and I'll do that.
All right.
Yeah. Don't let me forget, I'll give you his contact.
Julie?
I was trying to find, there's a couple of those that, as far as how have you been addressing some of the concerns that are coming out of the rural areas, or the legislators saying that there's concerns from the rural areas?
By just regarding homeschooling.
Regarding homeschooling, and that it's going to, the school choice bills are not going to be able to support homeschooling. So that's question number one. If you're being able to address any of what the legislators are saying, that they're getting these concerns expressed to them.
Okay, so I would say that the rural homeschoolers, we found, especially with our extracurricular legislation, the rural homeschoolers are actually the ones who need it the most. They're the ones driving for hours each way to get their kids into the programs that they need. So we actually did a scientific poll, and what I mentioned that stat earlier, but homeschoolers in general support school choice legislation by a margin of 70%. And that's across the board, rural, urban, etc. So if you need actually specifics on that, you can contact us and we can give you some data to take straight to your legislator.
That will be great to have that.
Yes.
And I know Jeremy mentioned that at convention, and that's how that was helpful, very, very helpful in getting it passed as a legislative
Yes.
priority. So that was very key. And I'm trying to remember what the other one was, so I'll come back to it.
I remember hearing once that school districts are happy to have private schools, that if all those students actually showed up in public schools, they wouldn't have the facilities to support them. Is there any embracing going on by public schools of homeschooling as a relief to their need for facilities?
You would think that there would be. We are saving them millions and millions of dollars, right? Because they're, of all the homeschoolers, or even private school students who aren't in the system. But no, there isn't. Generally speaking, the public school lobby is opposed to school choice parental choice legislation.
So my question is about the extracurricular bill.
Yes.
There was one in place before, and I was told by the legislator who put it through, that my kids should be able to participate in extracurricular activities. My kids are swimmers. The district we're in doesn't have a swim team. The next district over was courting my kids, basically. But it came down to the UIL rules. So does the new bill address the UIL and kind of put them to the side so that we can actually access that? Because this has been done before, but I don't think it had the desired effect.
Yes. So you're right that historically, if a district chose, they could allow a student to participate in extracurriculars, but UIL did not allow kids to compete. So basically it's like you can come play on the tennis team, but when we go to state, you can't go. When we have matches, you can't go. So that was historically, it was up to the district. The new legislation says UIL must allow a district to choose to opt in. So now, if your children weren't allowed to participate, weren't allowed to compete, now as long as the district says we want to allow homeschool kids to compete, they can. That has changed.
Okay, so my next question is then, does the district receive funding if my children do participate? Because that gives me kind of an input, it gives me the ability to go and say, hey, this is money that you're gonna get that you're not gonna spend on my kid.
Right.
basically.
So that is actually, we're working on some update legislation to include that, but not currently. So right now, your money is still going to the state, but if the school isn't getting it, so districts are a little bit less interested. Although a lot, like homeschool students will be covering the same type of things that public school students' parents are having to cover. So if they're having to cover uniforms or this or that, homeschool students would be having to cover it as well. But, so that is not the case yet. If you're actively working on that, get in touch with us, and we can actually help equip you with information. We'll give you data and specifics like that to help you work with your school district.
I'd like to take a stab. Judy's question kind of spawned something. So it's my understanding that legislators in rural districts in the state are not particularly fans because they claim that their base and their school boards are smaller and they can't afford to lose that money to school choice going elsewhere. And I guess my question to you would be, how would you guys as an organization frame that debate with your legislator that might be in a rural district that is against the school choice? And the best points to sort of sell that to that legislator. I'm sure you've got a few that would help some of us activists in that pursuit.
It's not rural homeschool, it's rural public school.
Right, rural public school. So the legislators are saying, hey, my school district is saying, so.
Okay, so in general, the public school lobby is against this. And they have talking points like, this is gonna hurt our school. So our perspective would be, I sat beside a principal of a rural junior high on the plane. And we went back and forth about it, and I just said, what if you, instead of considering the kids in your school, the kids that you need to help, what if you consider the kids in your district your responsibility? Like, what if we're, like, the kids in the district are the kids of America? So what if we all do what it takes to help those kids? So that would be one thing. His thought was, if you have those kids take my tests and increase my test scores, then I would be for it. And I'm like, are we for this business or are we for the kids? Right? Is it about the test scores or is it about the kids in the district? So I would say number one, we need to think about the kids in the district. I would say number two, if you're for a free market, you should be for this, right? Competition is healthy. So at Big Bend, where I went the other day, which you guys should all go to, they should pay me more for them. I met this lady who is a principal of a charter school, high school charter school. And she said that she worked for a public school, and all of a sudden one year, most of the eighth graders were gone. So this is what public schools are afraid of, is kids are gonna opt out. And right now, they are paid based on the kid in the seat, right? But the thing is, what if we change our mindset from let's take care of this system that is failing our children to let's challenge the system to grow, and let's think about the kids in the district. So competition is healthy. And when that charter school comes in and they've got to compete for their eighth graders, I think we're gonna see schools either decline or improve. But competition is healthy. We should be for that.
I could be wrong, but I thought I read in the Houston chronically biased newspaper that Governor Abbott was proposing that if you have a homeschool kid, $600 would still stay with the school district, and let's say $1,200 would go to the parent. And so that's like, we're gonna give you a little money, and you're still gonna be okay because you don't really have to educate this kid, and it's just like free fluff. What is the status of that, or did I just misunderstand Houston chronically biased?
Governor Abbott is going around.
Stop reading the
Chronicle.
I know what he's doing.
Yeah, I can't tell you the specifics on where. I'm not exactly sure which piece of all of these bills that he's talking about, so I can't tell you exactly where that is. But what we kind of dealt with when we were doing our extracurricular thing is to get the school districts on board, we had to make it optional. We had to make it to where the school district could opt in or opt out. So there are going to be things like that where you've got to take care of the district. And it seems fair and reasonable to me that if the district is going to be covering some of the classes or some of the extracurriculars, that some of the money would go to them. And so I think that we'll see more conversation on that. But right now it's all in conversation.
SB 8 says
you give the school that's losing a child $10,000 for 2 years. Rural.
So you're giving the school money for a little while to kind of overcome the challenge.
So two things, not to beat a dead horse, but one of the conversations I had today with the rural GOP chair was, yes, competition will help, and that they're not necessarily having possible issues with some of the things that we are in the urban areas, but other rural areas are starting to see an influx. So I said, I'm looking at it as a positive for their area, because thinking of the district, like you said, but I'm expanding it out further to the neighboring area and county. That there are children over in the neighboring county that are ISD that might want to now, if we have a bill that allows them to transition from one county to another county or an ISD to another, that they would be able to then go and select that one versus another one. So that they would increase then their actual student population and receive more money versus the other one, and also then take care of the children. So that's how I'm positioning it.
That's great. Attract more students. Attract more students by being a great school. And if you are a great school, you will attract more students, and you don't have anything to worry about.
And the other thing along what you're talking about on extracurriculars, one key thing that we learned about Middleton's bill is that, going back what you were talking about, swim team and so forth, and homeschooling, the example that he used was if you don't have the monies to have like an AP Chem lab, for instance, that the school does, and you would be able to use these monies then to actually take your child to the public school to have that service provided. So that would then help benefit of the school then retaining some of the monies to pay for those types of extracurricular, and it also makes it a win-win for the child.
Right.
And also you can say that
There's one in the back.
you don't spend everything, that it can go to the college.
There you go.
So
Yeah.
It was a really great bill.
There are so many great ideas out there. So sounds like these guys are tracking them pretty closely.
So my question is, my kids have always homeschooled, so I've never gone down to the district, I've never been in school, I didn't pull them out. My understanding is that the schools get paid, they get money from the state based on the number of kids in a seat. Where are my ISD taxes going? Because they're not going to fund my kids, because my kids have never sat in their seats. Also, I think most of this question goes back to the money. If we can figure out a way to make this benefit the public schools, they're gonna go along with it a whole lot faster. You know, because that's why I'm asking these questions. I'm gonna go to my groups and I'm gonna say, all right, we all need to get together and we all need to go down to Tomball ISD. We all need to go to Waller. I think Waller would probably be a little more, open to the idea, but Tomball is completely closed. I fought with them for 2 years. And I think if we can find a way to write it in where they get a certain amount of money or however, I think that they'll be a lot more likely to go along with it.
I think
Because
some of
that's what they're interested in.
I agree. And what you guys were saying is let's find the things we agree on. And that's where I want to say let's all agree on the fact that we care about all the kids in the district. Let's all agree on the fact that if you have a great school, you can attract more kids. That'll help your school. Let's think about those things that we can agree on and the benefits to them and lead with those arguments.
Have you got any specific stats on what you're seeing as percentages once a new bill is passed
That actually transition from a public school into a homeschooling situation or private school?
Well, I can tell you that after COVID or through COVID, homeschooling doubled across the country and tripled across the state. And homeschool groups are just busting at the seams right now. So I can tell you that people who are on the fence are trying some alternatives and are recognizing that they like it. You can also do, information requests from the Texas Education Agency and see the number of withdrawals to homeschool. So I can tell you that we're seeing a huge increase.
They were throwing out somewhere around only 2% of actually the public schools,
Students wanting to transition out, and so that they wouldn't see a huge influx, because that's what the negative is, okay, that.
They're saying everyone's gonna leave.
Everybody's saying, yeah, that it's gonna
Right,
leave.
so I think that's a really great point that, kind of like our extracurricular bill, this doesn't actually end up impacting a whole lot of people, because you still have to compete and find a spot on the team and this and that, but it should be available, people should have the freedom for it. I think it's the same thing, just because people would be free to homeschool their kids doesn't mean that everyone's gonna homeschool their kids. That's a difficult option, right? There are a lot of barriers. Did you have something?
Yeah, well, it's very interesting to me when I realized that looking at, for example, Tom Leazzi's budget, it says that it's over 60% of their expense budget is from property taxes. So over half of the district's money is from property taxes. So we don't even have our kids there. So it's very, I don't know, like I don't understand. They are getting our money already. So
Right.
it's not like, oh, we're not getting money from you. Well, yes, you are. And to me, like I have four family members. So in the district, I'm thinking, 4 of my family members are giving money to the district. So why get so upset about sharing? Or it's not like we're doing it for free, or the homeschoolers would be wanting to take away. So I think people don't know that much money comes into the district, like for the ISD from our property taxes,
Right.
for their expenses. So, and then some people think that homeschoolers get money already from the government to buy books and curriculums, and and like people really have that misconception. So, but anyway.
Right. Just like you said in the back, where's our money going? It is being spent. It is being spent, right? And our test scores aren't going up. So we have a systematic problem. We have an issue that we need to deal with in a very big way.
Okay, so I've met a lot of spectacularly successful homeschoolers, but I've also met a couple of disasters where the parent has neglected the kid completely, collected the money, or not collected the money, just kept the kid home and neglected.
Not in Texas. They don't get any money, but.
And really, is there any protection here? And I hate to use the word minimum standards, but is there any protection to make sure these kids can at least come out with the 3 R's?
That's a good question, and it's not one where I'm familiar with. I would say that every kid is important and deserves a good education. A question I would have for you is, have you ever met a public school student who has fallen behind?
That's not relevant to the question I'm asking.
Yeah, it is.
But my point is,
Homeschoolers aren't reviewed.
so there are laws on the books, yes, that would prevent abuse and that require that students be educated. So if a parent is keeping their kid at home and not schooling them, that's called truancy, and there are laws on the book to deal with that. But my point is, we're dealing with humans, and so no system will be perfect. And I can tell you that research shows that kids who are homeschooled are vastly less likely to have endured abuse. Nobody wants to do research on the abuse that's happening inside the public school by teachers, by other students. So I can tell you that research shows homeschool students are less likely to be abused, more likely to attend and succeed at college, more likely to hold to the values and beliefs of their parents. So it's a good question. We should care about students, right? But what we have to understand is God gave kids to parents, not the government, to raise and to educate them. We have laws on the books to protect children and to ensure that they're educated, and those laws should be enforced.
Those ESAs by design look a lot like an HSA, so that prevents the abuse that you're talking about.
I understand that, there could be some flaws, but, are there any, are there any checks to find out if a kid is not being properly educated?
It depends, it's on homeschooling or all education is regulated on a state level. So in Texas, homeschoolers have specific requirements that they have to be following to be homeschooling. And if they're doing that, then they're free to homeschool.
I've been trying to figure out which bills to look at, and I
Okay.
was looking at SB 8 today because that's the governor's priority bill, and it's the one that has ESAs in it. It's the only one I found that has ESAs in it. There's like 20, 30 pages of the 50-page bill related to that. It seems to me a really good idea, but even the wording in that one says that you've got public school, private school, and homeschool, as though they are distinct and separate, and there's no crossover. But I've seen crossover work elsewhere. Even 30 years ago in Washington State, I had neighbors that were homeschooling, and they had the option to put their kids in a math class in this district and their kids in a different class in this district, same kid, different district. They would take them to them, and that worked. And I feel like Texas is behind because we haven't caught on to that. So when people talk about we have these choices and we should keep these choices, they're missing the ability to, and you seem to be open to that they could go in and they could take the class. They could take their PE class in the public high school and be part of a team there and then be homeschooled, or they could do dual credit and go to the college nearby. They could take private lessons, private tutoring. There are all kinds of options available that homeschoolers recognize, but public schoolers could do that if they said, we like this part of the day here, but we'd like that there. How do we get to the point where people can see the advantage of free market in education, where you get higher quality at lower cost?
Well, I think one thing you can do is look at the states who are already doing it. Iowa has passed some, has been doing this for years, decades. There are states that have been doing this kind of thing for decades. So I would say that would be one place to start, and go to familyfreedomproject.org. And also, if you're interested in really getting into the language and all the different bills, I'll introduce you to Jeremy, because I was just talking to him yesterday, and I'm like, somebody sent me 6 bill numbers, and so we need to go look at those specific bills and check for this. They're on top of all of those bills. So if you wanted to look at language, we can do that. But I think part of it is we need to educate people, and we need to think differently. Like we've grown up with a specific system and a specific mindset. So the homeschool community is kind of used to thinking differently, right? We've already realized that school can look different from 8 hours and sitting in a classroom, right? So we need to talk about options. Because they started homeschooling back in the day, for these public school students, there are a lot of places where you could go take that chemistry class, especially if you live in an urban area, right? If you live in a rural area, it'd be really nice to have access to the lab at the school. But there are so many opportunities, and I think people are unaware of everything that's out there. When you dip your foot, when you're thinking about homeschooling your grandkids, if you dip your foot into the homeschool world, it's overwhelming, isn't it? There are so many options, it's overwhelming. So I think part of it is we need to educate ourselves on what's available, and then educate other people. Keep doing what type of things like we're doing here tonight.
And that's why I think SB 176, Middleton's bill, is so much more preferred over the Creighton bill in this particular point in time, because it does offer more flexibility, creativity in coming up with an alternative educational system that'll meet the needs for all of the students, not just segmented.
Yeah, not just a little bit.
Yeah, we don't have another speaker, so another thing you usually do the rants at the end. Judy, you know that, right? Yeah. We have more questions. I mean, I know we take a lot of questions, and yes, that was directed to you. You know the rules. You're not a newcomer here. So, any other questions for Stephanie? So, are we not blessed to have this organization fighting for our rights in the state of Texas? Thank you so much, Stephanie.